I just have the addition of three new granddaughters, and that keeps me going to make sure that we have sustainability in our planet, in our food system for the future generation. And I think that's the motivation that a lot of us have.
Hello, and welcome to the Power of the Public Plate podcast, brought to you by ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, and the UN One Planet Network, with your host, myself, Josefine Hintz, based in ICLEI's Berlin office, responsible for global initiatives of sustainable, innovative, and circular procurement.
And I'm Peter Defranceschi, running ICLEI's Brussels office and global food program. ICLEI is a European and global network of local and regional governments committed to integrated, sustainable development.
And the UN One Planet Network works as a multi-stakeholder community across 6 programs, one of which is committed to the implementation of sustainable public procurement globally.
In this podcast, we explore the stories of champions of food procurement around the world.
In each episode, we bring you insightful and inspiring stories of how the public sector can influence the food value chain by leveraging its purchasing power.
Join us as we talk to public sector staff, policy advisors, and experts to learn how to support smallholder farmers, serve healthy and nutritious meals, source locally and climate friendly.
In this episode, we travel to the United States of America, where we talk to Alexa Delwiche in California and Bertrand Weber, connecting from Minneapolis.
Alexa is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Good Food Purchasing. The center uses the power of procurement to create a transparent and equitable food system that prioritizes the health and well-being of people, animals, and the environment.
Bertrand is a hotel manager turned school feeding program expert. He is now the director of the Minneapolis Public School Culinary and Wellness Services, and amongst many other positions, sits on the advisory board of the National Farm to School Network.
In this conversation, we explore the story behind the school meals transformation in Minneapolis, where salad bars have been reintroduced, cooking has returned to schools, and really the public schools, they are on the leading edge to the farm to school movement.
We will dive deep into understanding how the Good Food Purchasing Program works, how to engage with farms and farmers, and which concrete steps public buyers can take towards impacting the entire food value chain.
This interview will be divided into 2 parts, so make sure to tune in for the second part of our talk.
And without further ado, we introduce to you Alexa Delwiche and Bertrand Weber.
Yeah, welcome, Bertrand and Alexa. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Power of the Public Plate podcast. We're very much delighted to have you, and good morning to you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, good morning, good evening. So happy to be here. Thank you.
And really, we can't wait to dive deep into your work, Alexa. I mean, you're working, actually co-founding the Good Food Purchasing Program across the US. I'm really keen to kind of get a good understanding of where this all started, perhaps to start with taking a step back to kind of learn what inspired you to create this program.
Absolutely. Yes. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and talk about the Good Food Purchasing Program and really dive into the leadership and the wonderful things that Minneapolis Public Schools has demonstrated through public procurement. And just to start about the Good Food Purchasing Program, I can give you a quick overview of the basic idea. So behind the Good Food Purchasing Program, our intent is to use the procurement power of public institutions to shift the billions of dollars that they spend on food each year towards food producers and businesses that reflect 5 core values: environmental sustainability, worker well-being, animal welfare, community health and nutrition, and local economies. And this is all centered around the principles of equity, transparency, and accountability. And the goal is to move massive public food systems from an economic-based model that really prioritizes growth and efficiency and profits to a values-based model that prioritizes our community values. I'm happy to give some background on where it came about from Los Angeles.
Yeah, that would be really really nice to kind of hear a bit kind of the where it all started, and also the types of issues kind of at the ground at the community level that were kind of an inspiration to start.
Absolutely. So the program first started in Los Angeles. It was developed by the Los Angeles Food Policy Council and adopted by the City of LA and the Los Angeles Unified School District in 2012. And where it started is I had the privilege of being hired as the first staff person to help build a food policy council that was convened by the mayor's office in the City of LA. And that was back in 2009 when my co-founder at the center, Paula Daniels, was at that time a public official with the City of LA, and she was tasked with putting this food policy council together. And the purpose of a food policy council, for those who may not be aware, is to bring together all the necessary food system stakeholders and decision makers to the same table to develop a vision and a roadmap for a more sustainable, equitable food system. And the Food Policy Council developed what we called the Good Food for All agenda, and it was a policy agenda for the City of Los Angeles. And one recommendation was for the City of LA and the LA Unified School District to adopt a good food procurement policy. And we saw institutional food procurement as a key leverage point for building more equitable and sustainable food systems because of, number one, their scale. Those two institutions are spending upwards of $200 million a year on food. And then also because public institutions have a responsibility to ensure that public food dollars support the public good. So the idea was, what if we could leverage that buying power of the City of LA, of the school district, to create more transparency in our food system and then shift millions of taxpayer dollars towards companies that support good jobs, the environment, high animal welfare standards, and regional farmers, and protect the health of our communities. And through that Food Policy Council, we brought together a very intentional and inclusive table that brought unlikely allies to the same table who all had a stake in food system change. So we had labor, environmentalists, farmers, processors, animal welfare experts, institutional food buyers, and collectively they developed a shared vision and framework that lifted up each of their values and priorities equally. And because we had spent so much time building that coalition cross-sector and had a lot of support from within city government led by Paula, who at that time was the mayor's senior advisor on food policy, in 2012, like I mentioned before, the City of LA and the school district became the first institutions in the country to commit to the program. And we tested the model in Los Angeles and expanded from there.
Really good to hear where it all started, and I'm really curious to learn from Bertrand. When you hear Alexa talking about the responsibility your government holds, was that the inspiration to start out on a sustainable procurement of food in Minneapolis, or what was kind of your starting point?
So the synergy with Minneapolis Public School was really more focused around health and future of our students, and how for so many years schools were a recipient of the food system, and how we felt we could be a change in the food system as opposed to just receive from manufacturers and others. I got engaged in school food because my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and that was the synergy for me to look at how we were serving children. And without being a nutritionist, without being a scientist, I knew that biting into a local apple was far superior than drinking apple juice that came in a box, right? It's not rocket science. Eating intact whole grain was far superior than a whole grain donut. At the same time, we looked at the sustainability of our program in our food system. And when, even though Minneapolis or Minnesota growing season, you can summarize it in like, whoops, it came and it went. But still within that time, there's an enormous amount of product that we could source locally, reducing the carbon footprint, hopefully increase the palatability because those fresh fruits are amazing, keep the money local, and help some of our emerging farmers with their growth. At the same time, partnering with smaller organizations that really don't have a chance to compete in the marketplace because of the food giants, and being able to partner. And I'll use an example. I don't know if I'm getting ahead here, but using an example of our turkey farmer, small producer, an amazing, amazing family farm that does just tremendous, but he has a hard time competing with the giants that are in Minnesota. By partnering with him, I'm able to purchase all of his dark meat that he has not a market for, and he can sell his high-end white meat to the local co-ops and restaurants. My students benefit, he benefits, the local economy benefits, and so it's a win-win for everybody. So I think the synergy was a little bit different. It was really looking at what can we do to increase the food and the quality of the food that we serve, the integrity of the food that we serve, all while having a sustainability impact, a local economy impact, and building that community partnership.
Thank you for kind of explaining where it all started in Minneapolis, and I understand food in that sense is very much a personal story, and it's very much about individual health at the end of the day, and it's really impacting entire families. So having that kind of government responsibility kind of extend to that kind of micro level is really significant.
So I think, it is a core value that is instilled in our department, but we also feel that it is our responsibility as a public entity to do our best, not just for our students, but with the community around us.
So it's really nice in the food procurement framework. A big challenge is big vendors and the small medium-sized enterprises or enterprise of color competing. On the other hand, equitable food systems play a big role. And I wonder in Minneapolis if you also tackle that, like when you say like small farmers, do you also look at enterprises who have difficulties accessing the market? And could you also elaborate nowadays how this sustainable food procurement work? Is it equitable? And how do you say, when you say we collaborate also with small farmers, what does that mean exactly in terms of procurement?
I don't want to pretend that we have succeeded in all aspects of equitability in our food system. We're taking baby steps. So some of the things that we've done, and as a school district, we also have to make sure that we follow USDA guidelines and procurement practices. So that in itself is a challenge because USDA's procurement practice really don't always align themselves, or typically do not align themselves with our core values from a procurement perspective. That being said, I think the USDA has made a tremendous move forward through their Office of Community Food System, some of the other impact in understanding the need of school district, and are starting to change some of their procurement regulation, if you will. We, within Minneapolis, developed what we called at the beginning when we started it was a farm to school toolkit, where we sat down and identified our goals and objectives and all of the core values we wanted to include in our procurement practice. We started that about 8 years ago. Move forward to today, whenever we do a request for proposal or a bid request, which is required by USDA, we have a set of standards that are part of that request. One of them is the addendum of the good food purchasing practice. So preference will be given to manufacturers, farmers, 5 cores. We also include, because we base our awards on a point system. It's not just price. So it has the GFPP, and then it has all the other ones, which include if it's a minority-owned farm, the size of the farm, their growing practice. Again, following a lot of the GFPP standards are included right in our RFP. And we've been able to do that so that we're not alienating competition, because I can't do that with USDA through USDA procurement practice. All of our RFPs have to be wide enough to encourage competition. I cannot limit competition. However, I can write my RFP in such that will either, I don't want to say alienate, but that a large food manufacturers will look at and say they don't want to go deal with having to deliver apples within 12 hours of harvesting. That's kind of a simple example, but sure.
Thanks. Also wonder onto you, Alexa, from a good food purchasing program perspective, hearing what is going on in Minneapolis and how they include also local food purchasing. How is the reality in other cities? Are they the same all over the US? Are they organized differently? Because the understanding is there is the federal level who has basically the mandate over food procurement, and then the local level has a rather limited influence.
That's a great question. There's definitely variation in terms of what priorities are of institutions and sort of where the focus is. But I think just taking a step back, the challenges that institutions are up against at the local level are the same. You know, we're dealing with massive structures and systems. And so I think the one point is Bertrand and the work that Minneapolis public schools have been doing, and the leadership is you know, if for those unaware, I think it's safe to say that Bertrand is recognized as one of the, you know, leading school food directors in the country. And you know, we knew of his work long before he knew of us, so it was a huge opportunity to be able to work with Minneapolis back in 2016, and that was facilitated by a dear colleague of ours, Tony LaCorey, who was co-founder of the organization, a nonprofit in the U.S. called School Food Focus. And they were very instrumental in the idea about, you know, catalyzing the conversation around both the power of school food procurement as well as the role that school food leaders like Bertrand could play to transform supply chains. But I think the important point is that it can't happen with just one person, one innovative, creative leader. It's because the scale that we're up against and that we're trying to really push is so massive. It requires collective action. And so how do we bring together, build momentum, demonstrate proof points in cities and institutions around what's possible? How do we learn from each other? And then how do we leverage all of that leadership and creativity to transform policies, supply chains, et cetera? So bringing all of those efforts together. And I think with the Good Food Purchasing Program, what started in LA, whether or not LA is a plus or a minus, depending on who you ask. We moved from those 2 institutions, but now we're working with 60 institutions across the country. And together, across its 24 cities, and together those institutions spend over $1 billion. So there's real power in that collective effort.
If I can add also to the local, and thank you, by the way. You know, I think what we're doing truly we do to benefit our students. That's the way we look at it. And I just have the addition of 3 new granddaughters from 1 to 1 month old, and that keeps me going to make sure that we have sustainability in our planet, in our food system for the future generation. And I think that's the motivation that a lot of us have. But to add to the local regulations, we all follow the same, and I think it moves it's pushed down. But school districts have also their own very specific procurement practice. What I can do in Minneapolis, New York City can't do. What uh, Dover Oyota, which is a school district in Minnesota that has two schools, what they can do, I can't do. So we all have different kind of restrictions, but those are not the final roadblock. There's ways around them, and even USDA will work with us. When we developed our farm to school procurement practice, got my hand slapped a few times, and they said, "No, let's try to think of how we're going to make this work." So they'll work with you, but the difference is, even from any kind of governmental agency procurement, what we're doing and what the Good Food Purchasing Office is doing is not sitting in front of a computer ordering from a computerized order guide with Cisco and just hitting a button. It's building partnership, it's building standards, it's building demand, it's creating a demand, and staying true to once you set a standard, staying true to them. So is it feasible? Yes, but it's initially it's a lot more hard work.
And as you mentioned, the aspect of building community or building demand, can you walk us through how you've gone about that in Minneapolis, kind of to dive deeper into understanding your relationship to the local farmers, kind of how did you even kind of start and where is it at now?
So I'm going to go back to School Food Focus and thank you for bringing Court. I mean, she was just an amazing, and I'm still in touch with her. And School Food Focus has now been absorbed by Food Corps. But School Food Focus is where it all started, from creating a demand, which is a little bit different than the local farmer. But on a larger scale, from a food system perspective, what we did at School Food Focus is I worked with 6 school districts in the upper Midwest, and we collaborated on one standard for all of our school districts. We collaborated on product specification. We collaborated on nutrition standards. We collaborated on values. So when we went to a manufacturers and even USDA for one particular product in their community stream, we collectively created the demand for one product and asked the manufacturer to change that product. Doesn't happen overnight, but again, the same thing. We've created the demand. First reaction was always, well, we can't do it. It's going to be more expensive. Ultimately, at the end of 3 years, they did it. It was not more expensive, and we got a better product and started shifting, whether it's the use of hormone in poultry, all of those standards that we said no. From a farm perspective, is working with the Department of Ag, and also the word of mouth, at least within Minneapolis. When we started with about 6 farms. We now have well over 18 contracts with local farms, and all of the new ones came in through word of mouth from the other farms. So it's, again, building that relationship with the farmer that makes a big difference. Or even if it's not a farmer, a manufacturer, whether it's a local woman-owned company who makes salsa that we partner with, you need to build that. It's not a signed contract. It really is, to some extent, and that's why things are different in all districts. I have a handshake contract with a lot of companies. Of course, then we have to go through the district contract and all that. But the upfront portion is a handshake. It's building trust and relationship.
Thank you. This is really inspiring. What I also wonder is, to both of you in the US, when you work on sustainable public procurement and promote it and sell it as a concept, trying to convince, I don't know, politicians or directors or schools, what is your main entry point in order to convince? Is it more that it doesn't cost more? Is it more about biodiversity, asking for more products from sustainable organic agriculture? Is it more about, look, this is about public health? Or is it more about the social criteria, engaging small farmers and SMEs? What is the strongest argument that you usually encounter in your work?
I mean, I think it really depends on what city we're talking about and what the priorities are for the policymakers. I think any and all of those issues really resonate, and I think one piece that has been really critical in so many of the communities where we work is having that coalition engaged and the community advocates who have very close relationships with the policymakers to really connect the dots between this program and public procurement and the food system and community priorities affecting constituents and so I would say once often when we start working somewhere and let's say it's a school food director who brings the program to their board of their school board, it may be that the the school food department is already doing really interesting, difficult work to implement a farm to school program. And so what they value in the program is the Good Food Purchasing Program is either an evaluation tool or a communications tool to identify and articulate from someone, external, lifting up the good work that's already being done, and then also evaluate where there can be simple changes made or longer term, changes that could be made. And then I think for the advocates that we work with, the program is more of a public accountability tool and an organizing tool. So, in let's say Los Angeles, maybe labor is sort of what really resonates with policymakers. In another place, it will be supporting local producers. So it really varies.
I think uh, without entering the political realm in this conversation, but a lot of it, when I speak with some of my colleagues, really aligns with core values of the person that leads the food service operation in a school district. And that's just a reality. The same as, we can still probably have arguments over the next 2 hours of the benefits of organic versus conventional farming. And, it depends what your core values are, where you want to see the future of the planet, the future of the health of our students. So that's a difficult question to answer because it's all of them. It's all of the above. It's all of what you mentioned earlier, but at different level. And when I walk and speak with some colleagues that are doing what they're doing because it's a paycheck, and being able to place an order through a broad line distributor makes all the sense in the world and it follows USDA regulations, I'm not going to be able to convince them that following a sustainable procurement practice is better for everyone, because I'll have an argument for 3 hours with them, and ultimately they need to make that choice. I don't think it can be accomplished through regulations. I think it can be accomplished through the power of collaboration with other districts and building the demand. And ultimately, the demand will surpass the number of institutions that don't want to follow those practices.
And as you mentioned, that kind of food procurement is very much a value-based enterprise. I'm wondering, Alexa, could you explain to us, and Bertrand, you brought this up earlier, the kind of 5 values of the good food purchasing programs related to kind of farming? Could you kind of elaborate a bit on that for us?
Our good food purchasing standards are really our roadmap for what we mean by building a sustainable, equitable food system. And these standards were developed through a very elaborate multi-stakeholder engagement process. We had hundreds of people reviewing them, and essentially we have 5 different values, which we've mentioned before, and it's a very flexible framework where we point to existing practices and third-party certifications in each of the value categories. So we're not creating new certifications, we're not reinventing the wheel. So we're pointing to existing practices or certifications in each value category, and then the experts that we engaged in this process help to rank them. And so it's what we're asking institutions to commit to is meeting targets, percentage targets in each of the 5 value categories, and then beginning to shift more and more over a long-term process. Like Bertrand said, it's, procurement is a long-term journey where overhauling the systems will not happen overnight. So then what the center's role in this work is help institutions understand how their existing food purchases align with those standards, and then support them in making those shifts over time to source more and more good food. So a lot of what we do is focused around transparency and just understanding where the food is coming from, how it's produced, how those suppliers align with the standards, and then going through a very, very detailed process and analytical support to help quantify in dollar terms what that looks like.
Thank you for that overview. That's very helpful.
So many inspiring and innovative initiatives. That was a sort of introduction to the Good Food Purchasing Program and Bertrand's work in Minneapolis. What the Good Food Purchasing Programs and Minneapolis Public Feed Programs relationship with smallholder farmers and local food procurement is, given the US federal system.
Yes, very inspiring story, and there's more to come. So if you would like to hear more from Bertrand and Alexa, make sure to tune in for a second part of the interview.
Yes, and to learn more about the Center for Good Food Purchasing and the Minneapolis Public School Feeding Projects, check out the episode description.
And if you like this episode, you can support us by sharing it with your colleagues and friends.
We really invite you to check out the other episodes, to connect with us on Twitter or websites at the UN One Planet Network, as well as ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability.
Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.
Bye bye.